sweet sounds of Fonclair in the background. A raging storm from 2011. And it's time to get ready for Indaba, starting in less than 30 seconds, right here on Talk City 91.1 FM.
It's time for Global Africa Today. Stories about Africans from around the world.
Well, it's not time for Global Africa Today yet, but it is time for Indaba right here on Talk City 91.1 FM, where knowledge grows. Thank you so much to the Emancipation Support Committee for sharing this fantastic program with us right here on your address for talk. Very excited, of course, because this evening we have the Africa Report, a feature, and of course, Viewpoint. It's time to go live to the studio with Indaba and Dr. Claudius Fergus.
Greetings and thank you, my sister Natasha. I want to greet our audience on the various platforms. I want to greet our brothers in studio. And we have a very interesting program this evening. I think it's perhaps a necessity that we have this discussion this evening. All eyes are on Gaza and the Palestinians on a whole. And what we are going to do this evening, after the Africa Report, we are going to have a discussion, and that discussion would be led by two of our prominent civil rights leaders in the Caribbean. We have Brother David Abdullah, who, of course, is a well-known trade unionist. He is the political leader of the Movement for Social Justice, and, of course, one of our leading civil rights activists in the Caribbean. We also have Dr. Asha Cambon, who is a director in the Emancipation Support Committee. And her specialization, if I may say so, is in the field of program development. She may explain that more clearly for you. So at this point in time, without further ado, because we do have a very, very packed program, and we are going straight to the Africa Report. Yes, Rene, could you bring up the items for me, please? Africa Report.
Palestine, Maibuye, run, Zionist, run! Run, Zionist, run!
As you can see, this is the National Executive Committee. All of us standing here, pledging our solidarity with the people of Palestine. We stand here because we are deeply concerned about the atrocities that are unfolding in the Middle East.
The Israeli government have brazenly, publicly, and openly declared their intention to commit a war crime and have commenced that war crime against the people of Gaza.
Bibi is a murderer. That's what the people behind me are chanting. Bibi is a murderer.
We just heard from a rally of the economic freedom fighters and the President Cyril Ramaphosa, both of South Africa, Irish Member of Parliament Richard Barrett, and the protesters on the streets of Tel Aviv, Israel's former capital city. This week's Africa Report addresses the ongoing destruction of Gaza and the slaughter of Gazans by the Israeli military, backed by the United States of America. But first, let's do a brief historical mapping. The foundation of the three most savage systems of internal colonialism in modern times was laid between 1870 and 1880. All underpinned by white supremacist ideology and all interconnected. In the United States, the post-Civil War Reconstruction, which included a measure of reparatory justice for formerly enslaved people, rapidly gave way to Jim Crowism, America's version of apartheid. At the same time in Southern Africa, the British in the Cape Colony introduced the Shepstone system of racial segregation.
and in 1877, a new constitution of the Boers in the Transvaal entrenched even more extreme racist segregation. Racial segregation climaxed in 1948 when the Boer Nationalist Party came to power and gave the system a new name, apartheid, South Africa's version of Jim Crowism. In England, some Jewish nationalists identifying as Zionists launched the Zionist movement around 1880, climaxing in the establishment of the first Zionist Congress in 1897. Zion equates with Jerusalem in Hebrew, and Zionism, the militant nationalist movement to create a Jewish state with Jerusalem as its capital and the Zionist ideology as its charter. With the connivance of the US and the British governments, the State of Israel was created in 1948, an event that placed the Palestinians under a system of apartheid that has lasted to this day, with some 11,000 Palestinians currently in Israeli prisons. On the 7th of October, hundreds of Gazan fighters launched an offensive against Israel for the liberation of their people. In retaliation, Israel vowed to unleash a scorched earth war amounting to nothing less than the total genocide of the Gazans. Masses of people around the world have been reacting with shock at the savagery of Israel's fury. One of the earliest African voices condemning Israel's hellish blitzkrieg was that of retired Nigerian academic and the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, on Arise Television. Let's listen to a sample of his views.
Where do you want me to start? With Exodus, which they say promised Israel the land in the Middle East, with the Crusades, where the Arabs took over the Middle East under the Ottoman Empire, the First World War, which then gave the Middle East to British Mandate territory, the Second World War, where Europe, out of a sense of guilt, because of what happened during the Holocaust, the pogrom against Jews, now gave the Middle East to the Jews. And the United Nations created two states. And that was the beginning of this unending violence, the beginning of the injustice, and the beginning of the war. And so, we are now faced with an issue where the language that is being used is the language of ethnic cleansing, international law being violated by both sides. And we need to be careful. When I say we, I mean we, the world. First of all, we created this problem when the United Nations decided to create two states in the Middle East, an Israeli state and an Arab state. And yet, from that time on, the world has not showed a level appreciation of the suffering inflicted upon the people there. As an aside, we Africans have cause to be thankful to God because the British first offered Uganda as a homeland for the Jews. It was the Jews who rejected that offer and said they don't have any attachment to Uganda, that their attachment was to that homeland which Exodus gave them. So this problem did not start 3 days ago with what with what Hamas did. If you flog a goat, it will start to run. When that goat gets to a wall, it will turn around and start to fight you. The way the Palestinians have been treated over the years, with the international community just condemning Israel for the way it has treated the Palestinians, just condemnation, and has done nothing to protect and advance the interests of the Palestinians is unconscionable. And so to condemn Hamas for what he did 3 days ago, to me, is an aberration of justice. I am not saying that all the things that the Palestinians have done since the creation of Israel makes sense. It cannot. You see, I mean, when you are based in an irrational situation, some of your own reactions and some of your own actions will have to be rational. But the Palestinians have been more sinned against than sinning. What we are hearing now from the Israeli Prime Minister is that he's going to wipe Hamas off the face of the earth in Gaza. If you do that, it's, you know, some of the people who are fighting on the side of Hamas were not even born when the Oslo Agreement was signed. So if you wipe out this generation of the Palestinians in Gaza, another generation, unless you are going to wipe out all Palestinians from the face of the earth, and you can't do that. Nobody has the capability to do that. You will simply be creating a new generation of embittered people who will continue to fight in order to get their justice. So the United Nations that created Israel has to now take responsibility for giving a way forward program. And what will be the way forward? Number one, we have to go back to the Oslo Accord. The two-state solution is still the best solution. Israel cannot continue to implement a plan that says it is the homeland for all Jews all over the world. And so the settlers continue to come in and take over Palestinian land, and they are protected by the Israeli government and by the Israeli army. The UN has to put a stop to this. As we say, one of our sayings, let us drive away the fox before we start blaming the chicken. Let us get a homeland for the Palestinians.
We should all be familiar with the maxim, inhumanity anywhere is inhumanity everywhere. You either perpetrate it, you tolerate it, or you fight against it. Let me now invite our panelists to share their views on this critical moment in the international struggle for human rights and justice. Yes, so that's the Africa report, and we will dive straight into the discussion on this. Perhaps some people may definitely have an issue with the both sides should share in the blame. I think that point was made. Of course, not everybody would quite agree with that. But I want to begin with Dr. Cambon, since you have issued a press release. And if you would do us, the courtesy of summarizing the key points in that message so that we can use that as a platform. And I will give way to my colleagues after that. But David, I want you to think about two particular issues before Sister Asha starts. And that is that Hamas is, some people say was, legitimate political party that won elections back in the early 2000s. Right? I want you to comment on that in relation to the developments after with the branding of Hamas as a terrorist organization. How did that progression in the minds
of Israel and Israel's allies comport with the fact that here you had a legitimate government in Gaza. And secondly, I want you to comment on the Oslo Accord. Was that really a veritable solution at all? Why did it fail? And could it have succeeded at all in the first place? So over to you, Dr. Campbell.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ferguson, colleagues, and all the listening audience and those who are viewing at home. Before I summarize quickly our press release from the Emancipation Support Committee, I just want to begin by saying that I don't know how people feel, but I am absolutely horrified and sickened by the extent of destruction and mayhem that is taking place in Gaza as we speak. I'm also sickened by the weak and immoral position of the American president, who visited Gaza and could only hug Netanyahu instead of using some sort of the theoretical power that the U.S. has to insist that we put an end to the outright murder of women and children and other young men and so on in Gaza. So having said that, and I'm sure many people are absolutely sickened by what they see as well, and I urge them as well to look at, don't just listen to the Western media, look at as broad a spectrum of media as you can find so that you can get a deep understanding of the situation. Because I understand that many people, we've lost touch with reality, which is what in our press release we said to the ambassador from Israel. He's far removed from reality when he tries to suggest that he has the authority to be disappointed in the CARICOM position, which was a very mild position, but at least it called for a two-state solution, and at least it spoke against the destruction of the murder of people in Palestine. So that's one of the things our press release said, and I find it very interesting that the regular media is very comfortable reporting on the sayings of the Israeli ambassador. At least I've seen two media give him full page spreads, yet I've not really seen the statement of the Emancipation Support Committee yet in any media. So we too are not, as our colleague just there from Nigeria was saying, there seems to be not a level playing field. Any rate, the Emancipation Support Committee condemned outright this policy and practice of revenge and collective punishment. That was our first statement. The other is that we condemned the siege of Gaza. We condemned the locking off of food and fuel and water and medicine to 2.3 million people. Then, then bombing of the Rafah crossing. Our press release said that is outrageous. You can't at one moment ask people to move and then at the second moment bomb them as they are moving, and then bomb the Rafah crossing where they are their only possibility of movement. We agree wholeheartedly, by the way, that people should not leave the Gaza Strip. That is the aim of the Israelis to, if that's their aim, to have Palestinians move into the desert, the Sinai desert under tents. Then that too we condemn outright. We condemned the practice of apartheid that has been ongoing in Palestine. We supported the Secretary General of the UN when he said that what occurred on the Saturday, 2 Saturdays from now, that 7th of October, when the Secretary General said that was not the first instance of violence and no one should treat it as if it were. He said the most recent violence does not come in a vacuum. I thought that was a powerful statement. He said the reality is that it grows out of a long-standing conflict with a 56-year occupation, long occupation, and no political end in sight. The ESCTT also called for a negotiated peace because we said it must result in a state for Palestine. There will be no peace unless Palestine has a state. And there's no justice unless Palestine has a state. We also quoted the report by the United Nations Committee on the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, the most recent report of 2023, which noted that Israel's occupation of Gaza and the West Bank can be deemed illegal. And this is something our population needs to understand. The occupation is illegal. It's not, there's no way of saying that, yes, it may be, they have a right, they have no right. It suggests that they are illegal for a number of reasons. One is that they have breached the norms of international law, which prohibit the following: the acquisition of territory through force. Those settlers have been moving in with guns, moving people out, destroying their olive trees, destroying their farms. No, that is one of the international law that they're breaching. The other, it must not deny the right to self-determination of the population. They have a right to self-determination. If they elect Hamas, so be it. That's their right of self-determination. The occupiers, cannot decide who they must elect. It's interesting that the ANC was also once a terrorist, or deemed a terrorist organization, both by the US and by international community, for the same reason, that they would not tolerate apartheid. We also said that Israel disregards the prohibition on racial discrimination and apartheid, and that Israel has breached the principle of proportionality in the use of force and self-defense. So their occupation of Palestine is illegal. And the International Human Rights Law, Protocol 1 of the Geneva Conference, says that people who are oppressed and who are occupied have the right. You have a right to try to liberate yourself. So in that regard, therefore, we said that the Palestinian people have a right to resist the illegal occupation of their land, and the international community has a moral obligation to support them. And therefore, we continue to call for an independent state for Palestine. And of course, the situation, the humanitarian situation, has deteriorated significantly since the issue of our statement. So that we would like to see supplies, 20 trucks, when they had more than 150 trucks piled up waiting to enter. That's supposed to be a victory. We don't think so when people are losing their lives and babies are sitting in incubators that will not have fuel in a little while. Genocide seems to be on the script.
Yeah, David, before you broach the topic, just remind us of the anniversary in Grenada. I think as Caribbean people, we should know our history. So just briefly remind us of what you are doing in Grenada. By the way, David is speaking to us from Grenada. Thank you very much. Yes. So, yeah. Go ahead. The Oslo Accord, right? Yeah, the Oslo Accord and what that two-state system, can it really work? Can that really work? And the political aspect of the Hamas movement. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, that's a lot to deal with. Thank you very much, Doctor, and inviting me to be part of this program. Yes, I'm in Grenada. I came over this morning at the invitation of a number of sisters and brothers. Dr. Terry Marichaud, who has, of course, Maurice Bishop Patriotic Movement, and who was kept alive with others October 19th in Grenada by having activities on October 19th, which is the day in 1983, 40 years ago, when Maurice Bishop, Jacqueline Kreft, Unison Whiteman, Vincent Noel, Fitzroy Bain, Norris Bain, and others were assassinated at Fort Rupert. And that ended the Grenadian Revolution, which of course, Asher, you would have been very supportive of, like myself and others. So tomorrow actually is going to be a public holiday in Grenada, the first time. It's going to be called yes, National Heroes Day, which is important in my view. But of course, the focus is on the martyrs of St. George's. And so this morning we had a press conference because of a contingent that came down from the United States, from the Dr. Ron Daniels and the whole team, James Early and other sisters and brothers, Reverend Herb Daughtry. Yeah, he's 91.
Line
Yes.
with us in those early days. My God.
Yes, he's 91, but
yeah, 91. Amazing, amazing.
Yeah. So he's here as well, and
we just lost you. We're not hearing you, David. Oh,
yeah, sorry. My pod seemed to be dying.
I'm hearing him. I'm hearing him. So go ahead. Check your system. Go ahead, David. Well, now
so that is no. Yeah. You're hearing me now because I'm hearing you.
Yes. Go ahead. Go
now
ahead.
we're hearing you, okay. But the pods are giving trouble.
Yeah, they're giving some trouble. Yeah, so that's what I'm here for. And there's tomorrow a major activity in the stadium, and I'll be bringing some greetings because, of course, I was in Joint Free Workers Trade Union as one of the senior officers in 1983, and very much part. In fact, Vincent Noel had been designated by Maurice Bishop to represent the People's Revolutionary Government to be the featured speaker at the union's 44th annual conference of delegates, which was on the 22nd of October, 1983. Our featured speaker was assassinated 3 days before. That's how close we were connected. So that's why I'm here. And so it's important. Last night I did one of our Tuesday talks with Don Rojas, and we explored a lot of what was taking place. So those who could view it on our MSJ Facebook page are invited to do so. And a lot of information Don and myself shared. So coming back now to tonight's discussion, let me just say that I issued a statement on the 8th of October, the Sunday, the day after Hamas launched the attack on Israel. And again, well, we got a little coverage on TV6 that Sunday night, and I was interviewed briefly on I-95 for the news, but none of the newspapers carried anything of my statement. It was long. I said to the editors, a long statement because we have to provide context and background and give information, some of which Asha just dealt with in terms of the settlers and the UN resolutions and so on. And the newspapers didn't carry anything. And that's been part of the Western colonial imperial powers seeking to set the narrative. So, for example, just very briefly, and I'll come back to your questions in a moment, Claudius, there was this thing where they said Hamas beheaded 40 babies, and then they backtracked because no evidence was provided, and so on. But that was setting the narrative. The hospital was bombed by Israel, but now they want to say it may have been, with no evidence, a Hamas rocket that went astray. Yes?
Brother Abdullah, just to say that what has happened today, what came out today, is that Israel at some point actually provided video evidence. But then they realized that video evidence was false because of the timeline, and they deleted it.
So there's a lot of false narrative that is going around. So congratulations on this program, because we have to counter that in whatever ways we can. We ourselves did a Tuesday talk, Ozzy Warwick and myself, last week to try to provide some information. But a couple points. Hamas, yes, is a legitimate political organization. And I heard Biden make this ridiculous statement when he went to meet with Netanyahu earlier today. And he said that Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinian people. Well, Hamas does represent the people, certainly in Gaza. They won an election in Gaza and represent the people there. So that's one point. The second thing about the Oslo Accords is that the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was primarily driven by Yasser Arafat, yes, and the Fatah movement, which was one of the elements within the PLO, the primary element within the PLO, did end up in the Oslo Accords in trying to secure the principle of a two-state solution. Essentially said they were no longer going to engage in armed struggle. Basically, that's it. And so, as a result of that, the Palestinian Liberation Organization took control of the West Bank and is now the Palestinian Authority. But their control of the West Bank is extremely limited because it is an occupied area. Israel is controlling the West Bank. And what is happening is that Israel has divided up the West Bank into very small areas in which Palestinians live. And for them to move outside of those areas, they have to cross borders, cross checkpoints, and so on. And Israel still controls trade and everything else. So, and then the settlers, the point that Sister Asha was making, the settlers have been moving into the West Bank areas, seizing farmers' land, seizing people's homes where people have been born and have lived for generations and so on, pushing out Palestinians out of the West Bank and making the Palestinians smaller and smaller in terms of the areas in which they can live and operate. So effectively, those Oslo Accords are dead. Israel has been violating all of them consistently, and the Palestinian Authority has been extremely marginalized. But what has happened, because the Hamas's attack on Israel last Saturday, has once again forced the Palestinian issue back on the world stage.
That's right.
Nobody was speaking about Palestine and the rights of the Palestinian people. Journalists were being killed by Israeli soldiers. Al Jazeera journalist was killed, and Israel has refused to allow that soldiers to be held accountable and brought to justice. Palestinians have been killed, arrested. We talk about the settlers. The right-wing Netanyahu government has been encouraging more and more settlers to go in and seize land and seize homes and so on. The mosque, which was very sacred, was desecrated by settlers and Christian churches as well, because they're members of the Palestinian community who are Christians, and they too have been abused and have their places of worship desecrated by these right-wing fascist Israeli settlers. So the world was paying absolutely no attention to those things, absolutely no attention. And then Hamas attacked. All of a sudden now, everybody's talking about two-state solution, and so on. So the issue has been brought very forcibly back on the center stage. And what it also has done, interestingly, it has generated huge movements within the countries of the West. So in the United States, I think up to today, there were huge protests in Washington. I think people went into a state capital. Jews, the Jewish people themselves who are opposed to what is going on by Israel have said it is genocide. And so you have Jewish people who are in support of the Palestinian movement and calling out the Netanyahu government for engaging in genocide. And in France, the French government has tried to ban the demonstrations, saying those demonstrations, and England as well. The British government has tried to ban demonstrations, saying that once you demonstrate and hold a Palestinian flag, you are anti-Semitic and you are engaged in hate and so on, and you're supporting terrorism. But thousands and thousands of people have demonstrated in Scotland, in London, other cities in the UK, in Paris, in Greece. So throughout the Western world, there's this movement that is developing, which is challenging their governments on this question. And of course, in the Arab world, and we don't see much of that in the normal media, but in the Arab world, even those Arab governments that have been relatively quiet, huge demonstrations have been taking place. So I think we are at a key moment. We don't know how it's going to develop, and whether the Palestinian question may not be resolved in a short time. But this is a key moment in history and a key turning point. And the genocide of Israel, the genocidal attack by Israel on Palestinians has been exposed for everyone to see.
Yeah, the
Over to
question
you,
I have,
Shabbat. Yeah. Go ahead,
brothers
Shabbat.
and sisters, this question of the curtailment of free speech in all these Western democracies, which have prided themselves for such a long time on this particular right of citizens. Can anybody tell me what they think this means going forward? This is significant. We're talking here Australia bans pro-Palestinian protests. Vienna, that's Austria. Berlin, Germany, the UK, the United States of America, the reports coming out today in terms of the kinds of gag orders being put on diplomats and so on. What does this kind of global suppression or universal suppression of free speech across the Western world, what does that mean for us going forward?
Yeah, Shabaka, just very quickly, what is significant too is that those attacks on free speech and on these popular movements cut across both parties. So one would have thought it might have only been Republicans, but the Democrats are leading that charge in the United States. Yes, and even in the UK, Starmer originally made a call saying that no Labour member of parliament or elected official should take part in these demonstrations. I think he's had to pull back on that. But you could see that the elites of Western society across the board have taken one position, but the masses are beginning to take a different position.
I just to say that I think,
Sorry, question I want to ask.
Yes.
It's like criminalizing free speech, criminalizing an opinion that you don't like in countries that have, proclaimed this as a fundamental right. I'm wondering if we're not sitting on the threshold of something, ugly, something we all have to be concerned about.
Okay, so I think it's one or the other. We could be on a very ugly moment in history, but we could also be on, I suppose it's my head where I work a lot in disasters. And we always say disasters are amazing opportunities. So we actually could be sitting on an opportunity where many people are going to start to unravel the beliefs, processes that we have been fed, and begin to see and examine things differently. And we really do need this moment of re-examination, because we have been sort of lulled to sleep that, the Western world is wonderful. We can all have, there's some dream there. So the people by their millions are trudging into these environments to capture this great dream. But I do think, so I say, so it's possible that it could be a far more restrictive world that we end up with. But I would like to think, maybe because of my years of experience in disasters, that the opportunity for opening, for mind opening, for bringing people to a different kind of realization is very possible. And that's why those of us, every one of us who has an inkling of a different the capacity to interpret things differently, have the obligation. And I mean, that's one of the things we said in our press release, that yes, the Palestinians have the right to fight, to liberate themselves and for their self-determination. And the rest of the international community, that's us, has a moral obligation to support them in that struggle.
Okay, before Brother Kwame jumps in, let me just go back to a point that David made with respect to the scattering of Palestine. It reminded me so clearly of the Bantustans of South Africa, which were deliberately done to weaken the resolve of the people to act collectively. So I want you to address that comparison, both in, although none of them started in 1948, but 1948 was a critical juncture for both South Africa and Israel, because the coining of the term apartheid came with the victory of the Boers in 1948 elections, the same year that the state of Israel was established. So can you speak a little bit to that that comparison between apartheid in South Africa and apartheid in Israel, which, as far as I'm aware, has not been given a formal name by anybody. But apartheid is apartheid. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And actually, in our press release, I quoted the UN rapporteur, one Mr. Link, in his report of 2022. I think it was of 2022, or December 21. And he was making this point that, and I just want to quote what he said. Well, the UN News, in reporting on what the special rapporteur said, the UN News said that Link, quote, ran through the internationally understood legal definition of apartheid, the system of institutionalized racial segregation practiced in South Africa. Israel, Link said, conforms to the definition as a political regime which so intentionally and clearly prioritizes fundamental political, legal, and social rights to one group over another within the same geographic unit on the basis of one's racial, national, ethnic identity. Apartheid, Link said, is not sadly a phenomenon confined to the history books of Southern Africa. Israel's military rule in the occupied Palestinian territory has been deliberately built with the intention of enduring facts on the ground to demographically engineer a permanent and illegal Israel sovereign claim over occupied territory while confining Palestinians in smaller and more confined reserves of disconnected land. So that's the UN. Okay, this is not radical David or Asher speaking.
Or
Yes?
Asher, but you know, Jimmy Carter. Yeah. Jimmy Carter was the first. Imagine that, one of the old president, Jimmy Carter, the peanut farmer, out of where is he from? Georgia. Yeah, he was the first one who after investigating the thing said, "Hey, there's something wrong here." He said to the American people, "Israel is not what we think it is. This is an apartheid state." And man, they hushed him up. They pushed his book into almost oblivion because he dared expose the nature of apartheid. And he was clear, just as the UN reporter was saying, he was clear, pointing out the little ways in which the apartheid word worked and the big ways, the way in which they segregated the partitioned off their land. And just the other night, if you were watching the news, you would have heard one of the reporters say, the Palestinians want to come together and protest, and that's those on the West Bank they're talking about, want to get together and protest in a big way against what's happening in the Gaza, but they can't because they are blocked off by these partitions that you have to have a pass to get through from one section of the city to the next. I mean, it is. I mean, that's what Winnie Mandela fought against when she fought against that pass system. And here we are with a pass system before our very eyes being practiced in Palestine.
Yeah, I wanna invite our brother Kwame Kamal, who's been silent tonight, to come in and ask a question, make a comment. I see somewhere in the chat people are calling on him. Brother Kamal.
Greetings to everyone. A very pleasant good night to our loyal Indaba audience. There are people tuning in from all across the continent tonight, all across the diaspora tonight. Certainly, this topic is reverberating throughout the entire world. It is a very relevant topic. It's extremely topical, for sure. I've been listening. I've been sitting at the feet of the elders, and when you have an opportunity to sit at the feet of a triumvirate of elders here, in Dr. Asher, in, of course, the legendary David Abdullah, and, of course, with regards to Baba Fergus. You sit and you take notes. Why don't you? A couple points really quickly and a question coming out of it. As we look at the whole issue that speaks to, one, proportionality. As a humanitarian, as a human rights defender, as a member of the International Civil Society Working Group for the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, I condemn all acts of atrocities, all acts of crimes against humanity, all war crimes, whether perpetrated on the part of Israel or whether perpetrated on the part of Hamas, Hezbollah, or any other group for that matter. So I just want to be absolutely clear on tonight that for me, war crime is war crime. And once you've crossed that threshold and you are targeting a civilian, whether it's because I hear people talking about the women and the children, but yes, even civilian men who have nothing to do with the conflict should absolutely be left out of the conflict and not targeted. Unfortunately, the bombardment that we are seeing, the disproportionate bombardment by the state of Israel on, of course, Gaza, attacking not just hospitals, as we've heard, some 500 dead in that one a gruesome attack, that one brutal attack, but in the 24 UN installations that were attacked that led to over a dozen dead there, UN representatives attacking schools, attacking other places that what we would refer to within international law as sacred ground, sacrosanct, so to speak, untouchable. That is absolutely horrendous, and it has to certainly be criticized in the harshest of terms. Now, as a cleric on tonight, I want to make the point that fueling both sides, certainly Israel, because there's a fundamental issue that is often swept under the carpet, and it's the role that religion plays with respect to a lot of these atrocities. On the side of Israel, reading what is referred to as the Tanakh from Bereshit to Malachi, Genesis to Malachi, if you will, the so-called Old Testament, people would see in Exodus and elsewhere mentioned in scripture, in the Holy Writ, in quotes, that there were allowances given to patriarchs and to kings to go into a certain town and to kill men, women, and children. And seeing a lot of that type of approach to a genocide that seems to be propped up in religion, that I absolutely want to condemn. On the other hand, I as an African, and as I land as a Pan-Africanist, I am not in any wise ignorant of the fact that across the Maghreb, so to speak, North Africa, as we speak right now, owing to Islamic fundamentalism and jihadist sentimentality, there are Africans who are shackled, enslaved right now as we speak, being brutalized right now as we speak. We saw the Melilla massacre as Sudanese try to enter into Spain. We witnessed what has happened in terms of Tunisia. We're seeing it happening throughout the entire Arab world. So I'm making the point that when militancy and religion comes together, it is a very, very lethal cocktail. And I want to say both to Hamas and to the state of Israel, as an African, I saw as I land at least 3 coups recently engage, some will call them revolutions, and I agree, that engage in the removal of regimes and governments that the people and the military found to be not serving the interests of the people, and they were bloodless. So is it possible to do it? Yes, it is possible. Africa has shown, using the spirit of Ubuntu, that if you enter into a conflict, that you are able, utilizing peaceful means and certainly non-brutal and bloody means, you can bring about change of regimes and resolutions without having to turn to torture and genocide. And with that, I land asking the question, what do you think, panel, in terms of the role that religion plays in terms of breeding a certain sense of hostility on the one hand, and on the other hand, a certain sense of immunity and impunity, that God is on my side, and so to hell with everybody else as we engage in scorched earth tactics?
All right, very quickly, it's not religion per se, but fundamentalist religion or religious fundamentalism is the problem. And religious fundamentalism goes across all religions. So you have Christians who are fundamentalists and will justify racism and fascism and so on. In Israel, the right-wing Netanyahu government and those settlers, they are fundamentalist Jews, yes, who are intolerant. Because I was making the point that in the United States, there are Jews who are supporting the Palestinian right to self-determination. And you have, Islamic fundamentalists as well. You saw that with ISIS. So across the board, you have Hindu fundamentalists who are intolerant in India and who are killing Muslims and Christians and going into mosques and churches and burning them and so on. So religious fundamentalism is a problem. There's been a rise of that, largely because we are at a key moment in history, and coming back to the point that Asha was making, we're at a key moment in history because a particular world order that emerged out of the Second World War is and has been disintegrating and so on. And therefore, it is easy for people to cleave when they feel insecure to fundamentalist religion, which they believe gives them a sense of identity and belonging and affirmation and so on. And fundamentalism is of any kind, whether it is political, ideological, or religious fundamentalism, is dogmatic and is intolerant and disrespectful and hateful of others. And that leads to other issues. But let me just come back to the Palestinian issue, because you talked about the possibility of a peaceful approach. The Palestinians, going back to Oslo Accords, they were attempting a peaceful approach to resolving this question. And Israel just refused to implement that two-state approach and continued with the occupation and more settlers and the border issue. They didn't want to go back to the 67 borders at all. So that has been part of the problem. And when that happens, peoples in Gaza in particular, which people have described as an open-air prison, the largest open-air prison. Somebody I saw on Twitter said it's not really an open-air prison, it's an open-air concentration camp. Yes. So when people are living in those conditions and have seen Israel going into Gaza time and time again and killing people, this is not the first time Palestinians have been killed. And so when children have grown up over the last 25, 30 years, seeing their parents, their fathers being brutalized and killed and disrespected, people's back gets pushed to the wall, What does that do? So we now have to get the psychologists and other behavior involved. What does that do to the psyche of young people who feel that their life is no longer worth living, and therefore they may as well take that chance and bomb the hell out of Israel, knowing that there'll be reprisal, but what the hell, because life is just not worth living. And so these are fundamental questions that we have to ask. Yeah.
And I think we have to look at international law and to get a deeper understanding of the process. And one of the things that I decided to open it and read it myself, which is Additional Protocol 1 to the Geneva Convention of 1949. And that Additional Protocol 1 says, listen, wars of national liberation can be embraced, that people can indeed engage in wars of national liberation. People who have been oppressed have the right to free themselves. Who's going to free them but themselves?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick note there, Mom, in relation to that point from the Geneva Convention.
He's using his right of son to interrupt me.
One of the great revolutionary emancipationists of our history who has come back into prominence in recent times. Just about a month ago, they unveiled a mural to Otoba Cugoano in a church, an Anglican church in central London, where he was baptized back in the 1780s. Of course, they baptized him with a European name, John Stuart. But this great abolitionist, he actually said that, rebellion was sacred, and observed that it was the duty of the man who was enslaved or oppressed to get out of the hand of the enslaver or the oppressor. Revolution, he said, was the natural right and indeed the grand duty of the colonized. So going back into our own history, we can find that kind of morality within our own history.
Yes, and I think the work of Frantz Fanon has been superb in helping us understand. It doesn't mean that we, by understanding it, that we are saying, yes, let's all jump out there and engage in that kind of activity. But it gives us a different understanding of people who have been oppressed, how they experience that oppression and how it results in them trying to free themselves and engaging in activities that the rest of us might deem to be quite violent. So we have to read Fanon again. And I found it amazing that during this last 2 weeks, I must have seen Fanon's name and various quotes by Fanon appear in journalistic works, maybe at least 4 or 5 times.
Well, I would go even one step further to say that Fanon has been in a revival since the early 2000s.
Yeah.
You know, in every at every manifestation of protest in whatever form against the injustice, the social injustice that we face, since the 2000s,
Yes.
Fanon has been prominent.
Yes, when that chubby brother who was selling cigarettes one by one in Long Island was choked to death, people said, and he said, "I can't breathe." People went back to Fanon, where Fanon says the only time that people engage in revolution is when, in fact, they cannot breathe.
Yeah. And let me just say that, the international community is complicit, not only in terms of the support they're giving to Israel now, but let me just go back to the United Nations. And this is one of the things you see where Hamas would have felt they had no other alternative. So in 2016, the UN Security Council, by resolution 2334, quote, demanded that Israel immediately and completely cease all settlement activities. The Council has on numerous occasions expressed concern about the situation on the ground, declared null and void the measures taken by the Israeli government to change the status of Jerusalem, called for the cessation of Israeli settlement activity, which it determined to have no legal validity, and that these settlements constitute a flagrant violation under international law. Now, the UN rapporteur then in 2021, 5 years after, said, in the 20 reports, I'm quoting, in the 20 reports delivered to the Security Council since the resolution was adopted, the Secretary General or his representative have stated on each occasion that Israel has not complied with any of the directions of the Security Council. Is it not clear by now that Israeli political leadership has no interest and no incentive to end the occupation? One statistic above all illustrates the remarkable unwillingness of the international community to enforce its own directions respecting the Israeli occupation. And he went on to talk about the expansion of settlements.
And Brother David, we have 2 minutes left in the program.
Oh, okay.
How could
And
that
so
be
what
possible?
he was saying is that the international community's tepid criticism of Israel's unlawful conduct is going to come back to haunt the world.
That's right.
And that is precisely what has happened. Absolutely. So 2016 to 2023, that's 7 years of allowing Israel to violate with impunity UN Security Council resolutions, flagrant violation of international law. What, therefore, are the Palestinians supposed to do?
That's right.
That is the question I think we're going to have to end with on tonight's program, because it is 9 o'clock.
Before you close, I know we have to say goodnight to Talk City 91.1, but I don't think I should allow the program to close without a comment on the issue of violence. I do not subscribe fully. I understand Brother Kwame's position. I do not subscribe fully to that, because if I do, then I have a problem with accepting the Haitian Revolution as a journey, one of the greatest journeys for the for the liberation of the human spirit, and in terms of that moment in time which launched the emancipation or the abolition of slavery throughout the Western world, beginning with the Haitian Revolution, ending in Brazil in 1888. Now, it was Robespierre around that same time who spoke about the virtue of violence. I'm not saying I subscribe to it, but if you read Fanon, you would also understand, and Sister Asher, you're quite correct, where he made the point. In fact, the theme of the book is colonialism is violence in its naked form, right? And it is only violence that would get rid of such a violent system, right? This is what he said. You see the point also being made even before Fanon. C.L.R. James in his Black Jacobins, he talked about the kind of violence that was necessary in order to confront the most savage kind of behavior, in war. Because when Europeans fought Africans, there was no rule of law that they applied to themselves, right? They saw Africans as brutes, as savages that dared to confront them as soldiers on the battlefield. So what you had in Haiti was something you have in the Middle East, with a Hamas having to decide, we have had enough and we need to end this. How do you end it? You cannot end it with negotiation. You can't. Right? I just want to put that in context. I'm not saying that I personally subscribe, but as a historian, I understand the value and the necessity of violence in a revolutionary situation. I understand that.
Yeah, I just want to say the Israeli defense minister said the other day that they are going to wipe out everybody because they are dealing with human animals.
Animals.
That is what he said.
This was stated, and so just to be clear, there's a nuanced position where one can understand without agreeing. So I understand with everyone in the room as a Pan-Africanist and as a revolutionary myself. However, I don't agree and will not subscribe to either side, and I'm condemning both Israel and Hamas now. When civilians get involved and innocent men and women and children have to bear the brunt for what governments and for what militants are agitating, then that becomes a very different kind of situation altogether. So I totally understand.
There's no war without massive civilian casualties. First World War, Second World War, all those wars. It is only when the people who are fighting the supremacist, white supremacist armies do the same thing that you see headlines, and that is the only theme in the news. If you read New York Times and these major newspapers, there are hardly any images of the destruction in Gaza, but you would see on the other side the things that Hamas would have done, even if
but we have to be careful. Dr. Fergus and Kwame, I want us to be careful because there's a lot of misinformation when they talk about Hamas having beheaded children. Right? There was no truth
inaccurate, for sure.
There was no truth in it.
It was a lie.
But 1,300 people died, and a significant number of them.
I did not accept that at all. I didn't say that. Huh? I didn't say they did anything. Yeah.
No. I'm talking to in Kwame's case. I'm saying, Kwame, one thing you have to look out for in any war situation is misinformation. That's number one. The second, and disinformation. And the other thing you have to look at is when they talk about proportionality in the international law, we really have to look at that. It doesn't mean that if I kill 6 and you kill 100, it's proportionally, we're out of whack proportionally. It means that the examination has to be What happened at the moment that you were engaged in that action? Was it your intent to harm civilians? Or did what happened in the process? So we are not to judge. We have no, unless we have all the data before us, as they would do in an international court, bring all the data. Since we don't have the data, we cannot judge. One, if Hamas in fact went outside of proportionality in its harm to civilians during that one day of activity, or if in fact it was as part of the process in some way. I'm not excusing harm to women and children anywhere in the world or to civilians anywhere in the world. All I'm saying is we cannot judge it. We can.
I just want to make two.
Put ourselves in that position to judge it.
I just want to make two quick points. One is that for the first 9 months of this year, hundreds of Palestinians were killed by the Israelis, and they were civilians. Okay?
Absolutely.
Right? So we have to be clear on that. Right? The second thing I want to say, and thousands were jailed. In fact, there was a hunger strike taking place of Palestinians, thousands of them jailed by the Israeli state. But let me just say two other things. We have to be careful about the words that we use. And there was a very interesting analysis of language used by the BBC, which said that Palestinians died, but Israelis were killed. Right? So it suggests, therefore, that there was a active thing of killing Israelis and a passive thing of Palestinians dying. Okay? And that is to shape how people think. And Dr. Kwame, you talked about militants. So that's another thing. How is Hamas now militant and terrorist, and the Israeli Defense Force is not militant and terrorist? Yes?
Well, I agree with you, but militants and terrorism, very, very, very distinctly, are two very different things. Hamas admits to having a political wing and a military wing. They have an army, and that army operates within a militancy. The IDF also has a militant wing as well.
So, but you see the language, that is why the language is very important, because it conjures up images.
Of course.
And so certain people are terrorists and others are not. I think, Asha, you made the point earlier. Nelson Mandela was
in the Western media.
Mandela was a terrorist.
I agree with. I want to make the point.
Was a terrorist organization. And
if I may, I want to make the point.
That. And this is the other thing. We've got to be careful. We are not Alice in Wonderland, and we mustn't allow those who think they are Alice in Wonderland to define for us. Every different thing that is
I want to add one thing before you come in. I just want to add one thing, and that is that we are also people who have our own peculiar history. We are a people who live in a region that started out with an invasion and an occupation and a genocide and which was followed by enslavement. We are, by definition, once we accept our history, we should be anti-colonial, anti-imperialist from the very start, and be very partial to people who seek freedom and dignity. That's so we must come at every particular thing from our own historical perspective, and that's all I want to add, Brother Kwame.
Sure. So I want to be extremely clear. I respect all of my elders, and as a student of history, as a student of theology, as a student of the social sciences and the political sciences, I am aware of the backdrop and what brought this to the powder keg, the explosive insanity that it is today. And I empathize. However, Ubuntu says, I am because you are, therefore I am. And so when a Hamas mother cries because of her child, some 3,300 people in Gaza has been killed as a result of the insanity of the IDF operating in, and I call both sides militant, and I call both sides fundamentalism, and operating with a certain level of impunity. some 33% of that, 1/3 of them were children. That is absolutely condemnable. And when you're attacking hospitals and civilian populations en masse, and you're forcing 1.1, some say 1.2 million people to go into the desert, that is genocide in any measurement, in any book, and it's to be condemned, and I do condemn it. What I'm looking at, however, as a practitioner of Ubuntu, even when it's difficult, is that if we continue with seeking a military solution for this, I don't see any end in sight. And so we will have to allow for the United Nations, which is wholly compromised currently. We would have to allow for the ICC and the ICJ, all of these institutions of accountability that continue to fail Gaza, continue to fail the people in the Maghreb, continue to fail all of the various persons who are suffering under colonialism of all kinds and sorts. These institutions have to be called into account because clearly they are not doing their job. And right now they are siding with one agency over the other, and it's leading to bloodshed and decimation. And my voice simply is, I understand the position that the Hamas is coming from and the Palestinian people, but there's something called a moral high ground. And when you leave that moral high ground and you are attacking women and children, you now create an environment now where your enemies who are coming after you feel a sense of justification, though improper and though incorrect. In their minds, they feel a sense of justification.
Come out,
and
I urge you to be careful. You do not know. We do not know if they were attacking women and children. This is the point I'm making. So we can, first of all, we cannot judge that moment on the 7th of October. Do not try to judge that moment on the 7th of October when you think that Hamas did something wrong. The other thing is we have, as David said, be mindful of the language. We are talking about the Palestinian people, and we are talking about their government and their army, right? So be careful. Now, so I say we cannot judge exactly what transpired on the 7th of August. What we do know is that those people were engaged in a struggle for their freedom. And things happen when you are engaged in a struggle for your freedom, that even you yourself may sit back and say, boy, I wouldn't do that again if I weren't in the heat of the moment. But we are not to judge. What we are to do is to try to raise our voice in such a way that a solution is found that is just. And the just solution is that Palestine, after 75 years, must have its own state. The people deserve their own capacity to define for themselves how they want to live, what they want to eat, how they want to pray, how they want to send their children to school, how they want to attend in a hospital. They don't want to be mendicants. After 75 years of people managing them, they want to manage their own life.
Yeah. Let me just say that. I just want to say that on that note, brothers and sisters, we join our voices with all the progressive people around the world who who give their solidarity to the people of Palestine today and over the future of this horrendous conflict in that region, which is resulting in the loss of so many lives. I want to say that I was heartened. I just came back from Ecuador, and in the middle of the Amazon, in the middle of an indigenous ceremony around midday one day, to hear the indigenous elder, a woman who was conducting the ceremony, call for solidarity with the Palestinians, recall the suffering that they were experiencing in the middle of the Amazon jungle, right next to the river, with some people who had been uncontacted until 30 years ago. And even in that environment where connectivity is so limited, the sense of outrage at the injustice that these people suffer was there. And it was one of the heartwarming moments of that indigenous ceremony. So we join our voices with those who call for justice, especially as a people ourselves in the Caribbean who come out of the fires of similar types of injustice in our history. We know that injustice. We know what it feels like. And our heart always goes out to those who suffer similar injustice, and we will always speak up on their behalf.
Yeah, and Shabaka, I think some people are organizing. I'm not sure who's organizing, but I've seen it on social media for a rally on Friday morning in the Savannah opposite the U.S. Embassy in solidarity with the people of Palestine. Unfortunately, I can't be there because I have to be in Grenada.
But David, that's your favorite spot.
Yes, and I missed the march on Sunday last. Right, I was not aware of it until too late, but there was a march around the Savannah. And I'm sorry I missed it.
We heard about that too.
I was out.
I'm sorry I missed it.
I knew nothing of it. But now that I'm back, I'll try to find out what's happening. You said on Friday, right?
Yes, that's what I've seen posted up on social media. I think 10 o'clock in the morning, people are rallying. So I think it's a global, people are asking all over the world are supposed to be doing something on Friday. So it'd be good for, Trinidadians, Tobagonians, in whatever number, to demonstrate solidarity in a collective way. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But thanks a lot. I have to dash because I have another commitment.
Yes. Well, we need to close now. Thanks to the team who are in the background ensuring that this program runs smoothly. Thanks to our audience. Thanks to our anchor at 91.1, who, of course, had to leave at 9. Thanks, Comrade David and Sister Asha. And my brothers there. See you next week.
And as we talk about Maurice, let's end with forward ever.
Backward never.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Righto. Bye-bye.